Is it a new treatment for opioid addiction, a strange new antidepressant, or just a weird trip? Welcome to the world of Ibogaine. If you haven't heard of this drug, you are not alone, which is why I am covering it today as a drug scientist, because it's not that popular in the United States as of right now, but it's being touted for kind of new reasons that might make it more popular in the future. So both Washington and Texas have proposed bills to allow us scientists to do research on this because as of right now, it's incredibly difficult to. So Ibogaine, just like other drugs like H and weed and basically every other hallucinogen, they're Schedule 1. And also, before I get this comment, yes, weed is still a Schedule 1. The only thing the executive order did was try to fast track the ability for it to be moved to a different schedule. It didn't actually move it. We are still in the same place we were before. And Ibogaine has a weird stigma against it too, which is why things like NIDA, the National Institute of Drug Abuse, where a lot of us researchers get our funds from, they did not choose to fund research into this, specifically like clinical trials to see if Ibogaine would work either for opioid addiction or for depression. And we also see that the FDA actually blocked initial trials too. So something is happening here where people don't necessarily want Ibogaine research to go on. So it could be because Ibogaine is weird and at least a little bit dangerous. And let me break that down a little bit for you. So Ibogaine is like a weird hallucinogenic. So it is taken from the bark of the iboga root, which is basically a plant that is more common in Africa. And what happens is that it kind of works on this variety of different systems in your brain. So first, it works on the opioid system. H-fen and like a lot of the prescription painkillers out there like Oxy, they work by being agonists on the mu opioid system. Now, what is happening with Ibogaine is it's not working on the mu opioid system, it's working on the kappa opioid system. So the mu opioid system is more closely linked to things like respiratory depression. So that's what's causing a lot of the overdoses, but it's also linked to things like that pain relief effect and some of that addictive potential. Now, the kappa systems are not as closely linked to that. So they don't seem to cause as much of the respiratory depression, and they don't seem to actually be that addictive. And because of those properties, people are testing it to see, could we use it to actually help decrease addiction? And we have a decent amount of literature that says that it might actually work for that. So as many of the good drug stories go, we kind of accidentally discovered this. So that there was this person who was just taking this for funsies, and they took it with a group of people. A lot of the people in this little group were actually addicted to opioids. And what happened is they kind of started talking to each other after they had their weird Ibogaine trip and realized that like, oh, hey, actually, I don't have as many cravings for the other drugs as much. Is there something to this? And then boom, this entire new research plan came about. So we've had some kind of recent randomized controlled studies that say things like, hey, it might actually work in helping with withdrawal symptoms. It might reduce cravings for things like opioids. And it might actually reduce things like blow addiction too. Now, the one about Coke, side note, that it was a pretty high dose. And you're going to see why that matters in just a little bit. This drug has also been tested for things like depression, and it might actually be good at this. In terms of how the drug works, it kind of makes sense that it might be an antidepressant. So for example, what we see is that Ibogaine actually increases serotonin. So it's a serotonin agonist. And in doing so, that makes it similar to the other hallucinogens out there that are being widely tested to see if they work for depression. And then we see that a lot of the drugs people take for depression, like SSRIs, they actually increase serotonin too. So there's something going on with the serotonin system linked to depression, and we see that serotonin is increased with Ibogaine. We also see that this drug is an NMDA receptor antagonist, and you might not understand what that means. However, you might have heard of this other drug that is very similar to it, ketamine. Ket is also an NMDA receptor antagonist and seems to work very well, especially for treatment-resistant depression. So Ibogaine kind of weirdly has all of these different mechanisms of action that make it likely to work for things like depression. So like increases serotonin, check. Decreases glutamate, check. It is doing those things that other common antidepressants do. Like, remember how I said that using this drug to treat drug addiction is actually kind of relatively new? We don't have a ton of evidence on that yet. Yeah, we're about a decade behind that for the depression aspects. So like, we don't know much. Like every drug, with the potential positives comes a slew of negatives. So let me talk about the pitfalls of Ibogaine. So first, it is a hallucinogenic, and that is incredibly difficult to use in like therapeutic experiences. So first, a lot of people might have just problematic effects. So they might have a bad trip. We know that set and setting, so where you are, the environment that you're in, who you're with, and what your mindset is, that all plays a role in how good your experience is going to be. And so it's very difficult to come up with a great protocol for people to use this drug in things like depression. And like the trip is intense. It is not just like you have mild hallucinogens. Like this lasts for hours and there are like multiple phases. The first phase is hours long and it's like a visionary phase. So you are completely out of that world. Like some people say it's an epiphanic visionary experience, which I didn't even know epiphanic was a word. That is how wild the drug makes you feel. First, you just kind of transcend everything and then you become introspective, and both of those last an hour. And then there's like a day-long experience that occurs after that. So this is not like you take your daily antidepressant. This is an experience. And with that experience comes vomiting, lots of vomiting. Like you just can't stop vomiting. That is one of the main problems with taking the drug, is that you get severe nausea. Then just wait until you hear the range of doses that people take for this drug. So we're talking between 8 and 1,500 milligrams. And they produce very different effects at different doses. So at relatively low doses, it's been suggested that has more of a stimulant-like effect. And then those high doses, yeah, that is the vomiting while tripping. And so it's potentially good because maybe we could find a lower dose that still produces effects that might not cause the vomiting trip, but maybe it's bad because people don't necessarily know how to dose themselves, and that is potentially dangerous. And that is one of the other problems. The big problem associated with this drug is that it can have some very severe adverse effects. So it might be toxic to your heart, so cardiotoxic. In some cases, it causes things like buzzing in the ears. And then there's this one specific comment that I saw in an article, and let me quote it directly. Insomnia, nausea, and vomiting, and not pleasant for all states, one subject died. That's some sort of weird footnote. So yes, it can be fatal. Now, is it likely to be fatal? No, but just like KET and just like PCP, it can actually kill you. And once again, because we have very little research on this, we don't know what the long-term effects of this drug are, especially since it works on so many different systems. That's the thing we need to be careful about. So Ibogaine might be a drug that has good potential, but we need to look into this far more. We need to look at the potential dangers associated with it. We are not as worried about the addictive potential, but it seems like it requires a very specific protocol. And like, I am watching what's happening with KET, where people can just like order it and get it to their house. And that worries me with that drug. And that worries me with something like this too. So maybe some potential, but as always, some side effects too. And now you know, Ibogaine.